The new Formula One regulations that came along in 2022 were supposed to bring the grid closer together, but instead Red Bull was pulled further ahead and is on the way of having the most dominant season in Formula One history. So, should Formula One slow them down? In this video, we're briefly going to go through two instances where Formula One came out with rules to slow down dominant teams. One of them they got right, the second one they got horribly wrong. We'll also chat about this year and Red Bull's dominance and whether we should be slowing them down or if Liberty Media will slow them down. Liberty Media have taken over Formula One and they've done great things for the sport. Whether you like them or not, or like the changes that was done, we can hand on heart acknowledge that they have done a good job for the sport. They've brought so many more eyeballs to the sport, there's so much more fans, and for so many years Formula One and the manufacturers have been trying to break the US. Manufacturers have been trying to sell cars in the US, and one of the ways to sell cars is obviously having Formula One being popular in the US. And for so many years in history there was a massive gap of no races there because there's so many different sports in the US, and when it came to motorsport there was NASCAR, which is the most popular racing sport there, and then there was obviously IndyCar, which is the second most popular, and then Formula One was below that. But now with Liberty Media and the changes that they've done to the sport and the exposure they've had with Formula One now has 3 races over there. Three races in the US. So it's amazing, like the change that's happened from the past to now. But obviously not only in the US, there's a massive boom around the world when it comes to Formula One, and there's just so many people following the sport now that it's just incomparable to when I was watching it way back when I was younger. And even this year for me at Silverstone, when we went to the Friday practice, I hadn't been to a Formula One event since before the pandemic, and back then when I was going to the races more regularly, we used to go down on a Friday and it used to be a lot quieter, it'd be easy to get in, easy to walk around. But this year I was surprised, there was queues to get in, the grandstands were packed, and there was just so many more people there. I remember back before I could go in and I could buy like an infield ticket. Now everything's sold out way before the actual weekend. So it's interesting to see how even here where Formula One's always been popular, the popularity just boomed. So the new ground effect rules that came out in 2022 were supposed to bring the teams closer together, bring the racing closer together, make it easier to overtake, and then obviously that goes hand in hand with the budget cap. So the top teams couldn't outspend the lower teams and have an unfair advantage just by financially being able to spend more. And then obviously there's the development time, the wind tunnel time, where there's teams that are lower in the Constructors' Championship get more development time to hopefully catch up with the top teams. So all these 3 ideas together was made so that Formula One was a lot closer, and we moved away from having a dominant team, which we have so many times in history. You look at the 7 years of Mercedes dominance, and then you look at the Vettel years, and obviously you had the Schumacher years before that. But this year, Red Bull are on track to pretty much be the most dominant team in F1 history ever. So, have the rules backfired, and should Formula One think about slowing the teams down? There's rumours that Formula One's going to disable DRS for qualifying, and we all know on the grid that Red Bull has the best DRS system. To be fair, I think is a fair thing to do. But even before Red Bull had the best DRS system, and even before this season, it was a weird thing that DRS was allowed in qualifying. DRS is an overtaking device, so why then are they allowed to use it in qualifying? But even if they take that away from Red Bull pretty much going to be on pole position. Max is pretty much going to be in pole position, so it's not going to hinder them too much. It might make it a little bit closer, a little bit more interesting, and maybe on a one-off event he might lose the pole position, but overall it's not going to impact them too much. Formula One, should they do more to stop Red Bull? It's a touchy subject because obviously you've got the purists who say that Red Bull have done a really good job, they've developed and created this car that's just so awesome and they should be rewarded with, you know, the success that they're going to have. But then you have people that are not purists. Formula One has now brought in so many new supporters and so many new fans. When I go to work on a Monday, there's so many more people talking to me about Formula One. But these people are not bothered about developments. They're not bothered about intricate technology, the amazing awesomeness that Formula One cars are. They're just interested in the racing. Because they pretty much came on board, the people at my work, they came on board in the 2021 season. I might have got a dose of it watching Drive to Survive in 2020 during the lockdown, And then obviously the 2021 season came along and the press was going wild in my country because obviously it's Lewis Hamilton versus Max Verstappen, and the papers were going crazy. So a lot of people got into the sport during the 2021 season in my office and around me, and I'm guessing that's a fair reflection of around the world. So these people are used to interesting, exciting races and battles, and now they've had 2 years of Red Bull dominance, Max Verstappen dominance. If Liberty Media wants to keep them on board, surely they should think about doing something. Surely. It wouldn't be the first time they've done this. And you can just go back to 2021 itself. The whole point and the whole reason we had such an epic year is because Formula One came out with a rule that hindered Mercedes. Ted Kravitz, a UK presenter, said so many times that they pretty much did that to slow Mercedes down. Obviously they do changes for safety reasons and they need to slow the cars down for safety reasons, but that was blatantly obvious that they had to slow down Mercedes because they knew from 2020 to 2021 it was basically going to be the same car, so they knew that Red Bull was just going to carry on that dominance of 2020. So that's why behind the scenes they did this to Mercedes and slowed them down. And because they did that, we had this epic season and we had this awesome season that everyone still talks about, everyone still debates about, and everyone still reminisces. So that's the kind of thing that could happen if they do decide to slow down the top team by making a rule change under health and safety, but obviously it impacts the top team. But there is a time in the past where they got it wrong, and we have to go back to the year 2005. Michael Schumacher and Ferrari had so many years of dominance, but then Formula One came out with a rule that hindered Ferrari and the Bridgestone tyre, and it helped the other teams who were on Michelin tyres. And that rule was kind of a crazy rule. As usual, it was a health and safety rule, and they had to slow down the cars because in 2004 it was the fastest that cars had ever been. And you have to remember that Formula One's always slowing down the cars. If you let the people that design the cars and you let them have free reign, the cars will just be unbelievably quick. It'll be so fast and so dangerous. But in 2005 they came out with this rule that was so crazy. It's funny how they came out with a rule under health and safety, but it turned out to be a dangerous rule. And that rule was that the teams had to use one tyre. They had to use one tyre in qualifying, and then they had to use that same tyre in the race for the whole race. They weren't allowed to change that tyre. I know, right? It's just a crazy, crazy rule when you think about it now. But back then, Bridgestone, Ferrari's tyre company, couldn't produce a tyre that was quick enough and durable enough to last qualifying and the whole race, whereas Michelin could. Before then, Formula One was more sprint races, sticky tyres. Bridgestone was like number one and Michelin was number two. Because it turned on its head and had to produce tyres that could last qualifying and a race, Bridgestone just couldn't get their heads around it, and Michelin could. And it totally changed the whole running order of the grid. Renault was number one, Fernando Alonso won his first world championship, and that rule was changed after 1 year because there was that infamous incident where Kimi Raikkonen had a flat spot in his tyre, and because the rule was that you'd be penalised to change tyre, McLaren stayed out, tried to finish the race, and then near the end of the race the tyre just went and Kimi had this big incident. And then after that season the FIA pretty much put their hands up and said, you know, this was a stupid rule, let's bring back tyre changes. So that's an instance of them getting it wrong. But like I said, you had the 2021 season, they got it right that year, and people talk about that season so much, and that brought in so many new supporters into Formula One, and is booming now largely because of that. So going forward, I think this year, if they dabble with a DRS in qualifying, that's okay, because, you know, it's not going to change much anyway. No other changes this year, but I think next year, if it looks like Red Bull are just going to destroy the field again, which is more than likely it could happen because they've admitted that they've stopped developing this car really early and they're focusing on next year. So if it looks like they're going to be winning again, breaking even more records, then I think they should dabble with the rules and just slow down Red Bull a little bit more. Obviously they're a lot cleverer, they can come up with something that slows them down and like aids the rest of the team. Not slow down so much that had the impact where Schumacher went from winning so many races and he couldn't win another race. Just the impact that it slows down a little bit, like in 2021, where then it brings the field closer to Red Bull, and then, you know, it's fair game. Because if they don't, I believe it's going to have such a huge impact in Formula One, and so many more fans are going to leave Formula One. We've got these new events, these new tracks that are getting sold out now, and if this dominance continues, remember Mercedes was dominating for 7 years. If this dominance continues, which it could do, it could go on till 2026 when the engine rules change again, then I can see a lot of tracks, a lot of people not being interested, which then has a knock-on effect of tracks not selling tickets, knock-on effect of people not having jobs, and yeah, it's just a whole spiral in a negative way that could happen. So that's why I believe just a little tweak, just to slow the Red Bulls down a little bit if they are dominating again next year. Because if they are next year, then you know for a fact that it's going to carry on until 2026 minimum. I have a recent video where I discuss whether Max Verstappen and Red Bull are going to win every race this season. If you're interested in that, feel free to click this button here. Thank you for watching and enjoy the next race.